covering today is a little bit of background on the state of privacy in the industry, some of the things you can do as an individual, what is the value of data, what are we really working with here, and ultimately, how do we make this better? So my background, I'll give you a short intro to myself, and then I'll let everyone else here introduce themselves. I was a consultant at Google. I saw some things, not just at Google, but the industry at large, that I thought needed to be improved and could be improved. And so I left, and I've written a book called Automating Humanity. I was in the social dilemma, as David mentioned. I've started my company, Beacon, which stands for the Better Ethics and Consumer Outcomes Network, where we identify these problems and then translate them into consumer outcomes and try to change these things on better business models. So today with me, I have a Beacon advisor, Richard Whitt. I'll let him introduce himself. Hessie Jones, who is our chief of staff, and also Tamra Moore, who's advisor as well. So if we want to start, Richard, go ahead and introduce yourself. I'll just go around as I'm seeing it, I guess, on the screen.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. And hi, everybody. Great to be here today. Thanks to David for having this amazing summit. Real quickly, I'm a public policy attorney by training. I spent over 11 years at Google. I helped start the DC office back in 2007. I left a little over 3 years ago. I'm a fellow now at the Mozilla Foundation. I'm an advisor, investor in a number of startups. I started working with Joe and his crew at Beacon. Very excited about their business model and their attempts to bring much more ethical practices and pro-privacy practices to the market. I have a couple of projects I can talk about perhaps along the way, but look forward to the conversation today. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Hessie, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thanks, Joe. And thank you for this amazing event, David. I'm really excited to be part of this panel and to be hearing everyone else. So just really quickly, I am chief of staff at Beacon Trust Network, working with Joe. And my background is really in advertising. And so I come to this panel as an anti-marketer because of what I've, I guess, contributed to in the past. But as of late, in the last like 3 or 4 years, I've started to really understand what data is all about and have dug into research on the ethical use of data as well as data privacy, and have worked at various startups trying to really understand what data is being used for and how we could actually make it better from a consumer perspective. And so in the last couple of years, I've also been trying to understand the policy side and how we marry technology with privacy regulation. And that's me.
And Tamra, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, David, for hosting this amazing summit today. My name is Tamra Moore, and I am also a lawyer. I have about 15 years of working in the public sector at DOJ and the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I am currently in-house litigation counsel at a large global defense technology company, where I have had the wonderful opportunity to work with a cross-functional group focused on operationalizing an AI governance framework for our company. And so that's where my interest in responsible tech and responsible innovation derives from. And I'm just very excited to be here and participate on this panel.
Well, thank you all for being here as CEO of Beacon. And I can't say how thankful I am to have you involved in our work. And I'm very excited to have this panel today. So let's go ahead and kick that off. As David had mentioned, leading up to this, we've seen a lot of abuses of data over the last decade or so. Obviously, Ed Snowden brought to light the surveillance that's going on across the world through the NSA and different government organizations, like 2013, But then since then, we've seen simpler examples, such as Google Maps leading to arrests through bulk data collection, Amazon Ring creating partnerships with law enforcement agencies to get their product out, even though we as consumers don't really know that was the intent. Or more recently, as David had mentioned, Apple's program to proactively scan all our photos and things, which has backfired. So, consumers are becoming more aware, especially thanks to documentaries like Coded Bias or The Social Dilemma, The Great Hack, several which have come out over the last 3 to 5 years. They're growing in awareness. They're growing in concern. They're starting to look for alternates and alternatives, but it's not as easy as it may appear on the surface. Now, what we're seeing in the news is these big names, but as you all know, there's a lot more to it than what we see just on the surface and what news media organizations are capable of understanding and then interpreting to us. I'd like to start off by taking a couple minutes each to really discuss the intricacies of this networked world, because the realities of it is what we see day to day are these big players that are getting in trouble, but there are so many different parts and so many different layers that's making change difficult. So Hessie, maybe if you could kick us off and talk about some issues that you've seen that you think are creating more friction to change, and then we can lead later on into how we leverage those as opportunities.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Joe. So like I said in the beginning, I actually came from advertising. So I have done this for a dozen years, and I pivoted from direct marketing offline to actually doing it online. And so I worked with an organization which was relevant at the time called Yahoo. So we understood behavioral marketing. So what consumers need to understand is that the more you buy, that a company will try to sell you stuff. The more you tell other people, the more a company will start to reward you. So there's this perpetual cycle that will continue for advertisers to find more people like you. And over time, data has become this increasingly invaluable asset because it's everywhere. People are now putting themselves online, their conversations, their behaviors, they're instrumenting their bodies, their cars, their homes. And for marketers like me, we really love that. So recently in Twitter, I actually reference this a lot because it actually encapsulates what's happening today. Data isn't the new oil. It's actually the new glitter. It lures humans with its shininess. It's easy to accumulate. It's found in places you're least likely to find it. It's almost impossible to get rid of, but everyone insists on using it without really thinking about the consequences. So what we're trying to get to is, as marketers, finding out what our audience, what's in their heads and what makes them tick, because we believe the most ideal customer is the most profitable one. So when digital came along, we started making associations with this buying funnel because we had so much more data. And so we had where people worked, where they lived, where they checked in. At an aggregate level, we also knew what people were searching for the things that we as marketers were trying to sell. And it's been compounded with the advent of social media. And now we're able to contextualize behaviors now to emotions, to interest, to influence, and what people are thinking. So this is very powerful. And the thinking goes, the more data yields better performance, hence more profits. So that's what's happening on the data side, on the advertising side. But on the other side, which is development, software development, it's becoming much easier for developers these days. And I want to do a shout out to Alan Woods, who helped me really understand what's going on in code. For those of you who aren't developers, this stuff is nuts. So trying to be able to understand this stuff was really important to me. So one thing that we have today is that there are a plethora of libraries. They're called jQuery libraries that developers can reference for easy to use code. They power almost 75% of the top million websites. There's also this thing called Ajax, which is an application that can send and receive data in the background without interfering with the display of a website. So things like Facebook content, your likes, your retweets from Twitter, they depend on Ajax to be able to render the site properly. And then you have JavaScript, which is used by 97% of the world's websites. And it's the core programming language of the World Wide Web. And the last thing is the HTTP request. This is, there's no easy way to say it. It's an API. But what it does, it has both the attributes of a website plus procedures, which actually transfer information from your web browser, to a third-party server somewhere else. And so the W3C actually identified that any of these HTTP requests can expose things like fingerprinting through persistent cookies, other things that could identify you, header requests from your IP information, as well as your browser or version or the version of the OS that's actually on your machine. And so taken all together, this whole norm about write less, do more means that you get more done with fewer lines of code, but also means that increasing use of this JavaScript and libraries and less scrutiny being placed on the code means that we increase our vulnerability to this inadvertent data sharing.
Yeah, I think it's important people understand that, while we're moving faster as teams, we're adding these simple libraries, we're using plugins, we're using third parties that expedite our development time, reduce our production costs, things like that. It also means we're becoming more reliant on these scripts like you're talking about, right, Hessie? These embedded cookies, these embedded other things that as a small business that's just trying to get off the ground, we may not really think about or know about. Richard, can you take a moment maybe to talk about more of those details and maybe the data broker system behind it and how this is all connected?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this, for me, the root comes down to the fact that we're all treated online as users, right? We're not customers or clients or patrons. We are the object of the advertising. And this really grew up starting with Google, back with AdSense and AdWords. They were the ones who sort of hit the honeypot back in the early 2000s when they realized this notion of adding eyeballs and advertisement and then bringing in all the folks who have the content that people like to utilize online. From that, we've seen now this rise of this sort of shadowy world of the data broker. The Federal Trade Commission did a report back in 2015, which attempted to get at it. But frankly, one of the difficulties is that, except for the state of Vermont, I'm not familiar with any place that's attempted to even identify, let alone sort of register, even potentially regulate some of these entities. But basically what they do is they buy, sell, trade, share, barter personal data for a profit. And it's an enormously profitable business. It's an area that, and I like to talk about, the idea of data as this good that it's a non-fungible good, as people talk about, but it's also non-rivalrous, which means the more you share, essentially, the more people benefit from it. The basic problem is that people benefiting from it today are typically not the end user, quote unquote, the person who's generating it, the person whose behaviors online are resulting in all these different trails that the data brokers and advertisers and marketers pick up on and make money off of. We typically get the free content, which was great. I, for one, love my free cat videos online, keep them coming. But the point is that's probably a small slice of the value we get. As a public policy attorney, I can also say quickly, you look at the headlines and the surface layer, it looks like things are happening, right? For example, you see, okay, we're going to have antitrust investigations, we're going to have reports, we're going to have hearings, maybe even substantial fines levied. And yet you don't see much of a change in behavior after a number of years of this happening. In fact, recently you saw a court in the US, a federal court, throw out a case that had been filed by a bunch of federal and state regulators on the basis that it didn't actually state a sufficient legal claim, which suggests, at least in the United States, our antitrust laws may need to be updated to basically take into account this new sort of multi-sided platform environment we live in. And then finally, data breaches. We see breaches happening all the time, every week, and yet those of us who are, again, are the quote end users typically have no recourse. We wait around to see what's happened. Has my social security number been put online someplace? Are people having access to it? Maybe putting accounts into my name? Am I being phished? Am I, all these sort of, the parade of horribles continues. And yet again, as just typically as users and not as customers or clients, we have few rights and no recourse in those situations.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much is going on behind the scenes that we don't really know. And all we see in the headlines is Google and Facebook and Amazon. And while they are problems, there are so many other entities, millions of other entities that have created this huge network of companies and data engagements and things that we have no idea about as the end user often. Another thing that we spoke about, Tamra, leading up to this panel, was the interconnectedness of data and how my data might impact someone else, and we have really no idea. Can you please explain to everyone, the stories that you've seen and how you understand that?
Sure. Yes, just you hit the nail on the head. I think exacerbating this problem is the fact that we as the users often have no idea that our data is being used for other purposes outside of what we think we are agreeing to. So for example, in the, direct to consumer genetic testing context, you sign up for what you think you're getting is an analysis of your ancestry, but don't realize that when you're clicking, I agree, that you're also agreeing to potentially having law enforcement access your data, and then, possibly finding an individual you're related to who's committed a crime. The people who are sort of downstream from my use of it, my family members, extended family members, and so on, didn't sign up for having their information put out there. But so you can see here that it's not just our own information that is being used for purposes that we may not even be aware of, because oftentimes these privacy policies are hard to read, hard to understand, and also the expediency of it. Honestly, I think Richard had said this the other day about how, it's just at the point where you really want to just get to what you're trying to purchase that they give you, here, read all of this. I'm a lawyer by trade. I can promise you, and I know this is terrible, I almost never read any of that fine print, as I'll call it. And I'll just click, I agree. So if I'm doing this, I know that others are doing it, and that is a problem. And so I think it's both compounding the fact that you as the user don't know how your data is being used outside of the context that you have agreed to, and the way that your information out there impacts other individuals.
Yeah, oftentimes a lot of those agreements are written for lawyers, by lawyers, for lawyers, right? And yet we're expecting the general public to understand. That's a big thing we're working on with our software, Pulse, right? And we talk about it all the time. So the reality of it is that, we're seeing all these laws pop up across the states. There are, in 2018, there were 2 laws that were either enacted or proposed in the US, and now there are 27 states. This is moving fast. It's something that lawmakers are interested in, the public's interested in, and it's great to have rights, but at the end of the day, what do rights matter if we don't know what they mean, right? Can we have everyone please take a moment, and we'll start with Tamra, because I know you're passionate about this. Please explain a little bit to everyone about, the value of data literacy and how, reality is we don't fully understand what's going on or how to maintain these things. And maybe beyond that, like, what is the value of these assets? How do we start to conceptualize that? Because as Richard had talked about, we now have these antitrust cases that are coming down. And a lot of times the reason why these lawyers are incapable of enacting the law is because they're saying, well, it's free, so it must be best for consumers, right? There's a lot of this going on where, number one, like we just spoke about, it's a very intricate, rooted network system, right? That's a hard thing to break up, all those different layers. But then there's also, from a consumer's perspective, how do we even know what to demand if we don't even know what we're looking at? So exactly. Tamra, I'm going to lead off with you, let you, take the floor here again and speak about that.
Sure. So often people talk about data literacy in the context of big companies and understanding how data is used within your corporate enterprise. But perhaps maybe we need to change that, that dynamic and consider data literacy for users like us who are wanting to understand what we're purchasing and how, and the exact scope of its use. So, for example, making these privacy terms and conditions simpler to read and understand, and perhaps in a context that's not right at the cusp of where you're trying to purchase the thing, the genetic testing, the online, your TikTok account you're signing up for. Having that information at a place and time that is both understandable and you have time to digest it, I think is one of the critical things that, we as users should be demanding. And I think also the fact that, oftentimes, as you noted, it's such an intricate web of entities and individuals who are trading our data, our personal information, and you have no idea that that's happening. And what are their responsibilities in that that ecosystem. What are they supposed to be doing? Are they protecting our information? As Richard noted, there's, you can access the courts, you can file an antitrust lawsuit, as regulators have done. You can, as consumers, file a Fair Credit Reporting Act litigation. But the key here is that what happens? Can you remedy the harm? If there's a data breach and you sue, oftentimes, at least in a federal court, you have to show some tangible harm in order to be able to pursue your claim. And a lot of times, at least the way that our courts have looked at what that is called standing, is that, the fact that someone has taken your information isn't a harm. You have to have some ability to show either that, they've taken so much information that your identity is potentially at risk of being taken. And that concept itself doesn't even take into consideration that you don't need that much data about an individual to be able to take that information and re-identify who the individuals are. So there are a lot of different issues, I think, that need to be addressed in order to be able to protect our data and our interest in our data, and holding people accountable to what they say they're planning to do with our data, and how they protect it.
Yeah, literacy is a huge issue, and it's not just for the public, it's even for our regulators, right? We're seeing, even a couple years ago, these regulators who are asking Facebook, well, how do you make money? It's ads, well, duh. But then a few years later, they're getting much more informed, right? They're not the experts that we may hope to have in front of us for representatives, but they are working to get better, and that is important, and we all need to work that way. But the other thing that we have to consider too, and Hessie, I know we've spoken plenty about this in our work, is like, what does it even mean to give consent nowadays? We have all these, as been mentioned, these pop-ups to happen right at the moment of access. We have things where we're walking out in the real world and cameras are scanning us all the time, and we're hitting Wi-Fi networks that are general public, but actually someone has access to that information. And what does consent really even mean nowadays? And what should the average person be thinking about as they're engaging with these platforms?
Yeah, I think that is going to be a huge issue, at least in the near term. Like we know there will be consent fatigue if businesses are held to account in a lot of cases, how they're using your data, in what way, who they're sharing it with. It's almost like it's odd for naught. You need to be able to find better ways to balance what people have, what they share, and how businesses are using it. So there has to be this transparency layer. I can tell you that on the business side, there are businesses that are or companies that are starting to be more proactive about doing the right thing. And when it comes to consent, it means also control, giving actual control to the individual to say, I own my data and I will allow you to use my data when within these specific contexts. And if I want to turn off the tap, then I can turn off the tap, and you do not have the right to use it from that standpoint. There was a one ad exec that said to me one time, I asked him what the future of advertising was, and he saw all this privacy stuff coming down the pipe even 5-6 years ago. And he said that data privacy means having the ability to control when and why data that you own is used. It's not the ability to actually keep it secret, which is far easier. So for that to happen, he envisioned that there would be this open and transparent marketplace where people and companies can sell data that they create, as well as a consistent set of regulations for companies to actually do that. So there are companies today, like Streamlytics, that not only collect the data responsibly, making sure that there is positive consent, but allows individuals to actually reclaim and monetize their own information. They provide consent, but they're also given transparency, full transparency in who, what, when, and how their data is being exposed. So that's one example. Last year, I actually worked in a working group with My Data, and they were building out a pandemic framework following what was happening in COVID. we wanted to understand that in a future where we could potentially have more pandemics, we realized that the importance of mobility was an issue, and businesses and business owners needed information to make decisions about their businesses, for their employees, for business continuity, etc. And so the information and patient data was critical to understanding the movement of the disease, but also how critical it was for the business decisions. But they wanted to do it in a way that allowed the individuals to positively consent to the data, but also have the ability to turn this off based on context. And the third example is something that's actually happening here in Ontario, Canada, probably in the next couple of weeks. Ontario is slated to issue our first digital ID. And so this ID is actually going to be stored in a digital wallet. It's going to be available for download onto your smartphones, your devices. It's not stored in a central database, and it's saved on your own mobile phone. So it will be turned off remotely if it's stolen. And the government basically says that it's not a tracking device. It will not keep track of where you've used your ID. But for example, if you're going into premises where they want to determine whether or not you are of age, then it will not show your age, but it will only verify that you are over 18 years old. So in these instances, we're already seeing that industry is taking a lot of proactive steps to help the cause of privacy, whether or not it's through these technologies, but also looking at things like algorithmic impact assessments that allow young companies to begin to understand whether or not there are potential harms in the models that they create. These are the types of things that I think are happening. It does take a village. It does take data literacy. But I think as long as there is this proactiveness within industry, I think that together with the demand from a consumer perspective will go a long way.
Yeah, I think you also hit on a critical point there in talking about how it's getting paid for and who's getting actually paid for it and things like that, right? Maybe if we as consumers were paid for our data, we'd have more incentive to read the terms, to engage with these experiences, think about things like that, right? It's said that our data through Facebook annually is worth upwards of $100 to $200 per person sometimes is the assumption. We don't fully know. There's not a lot of transparency there, but it's been spoken about. Think about if we were even worth, 25 cents to the average company, and we go through 50,000 companies a year. You're talking about earning $12,500 a year. That's very equivalent almost to Andrew Yang's UBI idea. So Richard, if you would kind of end this question part with what is the value of data? How do we think about it? And is there a bridge to where maybe in the future consumers start to get paid for their data, to which this whole engagement becomes more valuable to them as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, economists, experts in the field differ enormously, right? About even like basically, is this a good or is this a form of labor? Is this private, private or common? Is it a commodity? A lot of folks go back and forth. But the bottom line is it's enormously valuable. It's enormously valuable to us as individuals, but also as members of society. So in part, you talked about the economic value. The economic value within a silo like Facebook, maybe it's $7. If you multiply the silos, maybe you get more than that. But part of the point of this, I think, beautiful idea of non-rivalry is that if you share it on your terms with a whole variety of folks, you could probably get a multiplier effect. You can get much more value out of it economically if you're in charge, if you're in control, as Hessie was talking about, than if you just sort of wait on Facebook or Google to, add to the ledger every month and send you a small check in the mail, virtually at least. So that's sort of one part. The second part is data is worth much more as a society. So if you can share your medical data, your genetic data, as Tamra touched on previously, right now you don't want to share it with the world, clearly. But if you know that there are expert researchers, folks in medical labs that are trustworthy, that want to use that data in ways to perhaps try to find the next cure to the next illness, and your data could be an important part of that trialing, you would want to do that, but you want to do that in ways that are privacy enhanced, that you make sure that nothing is being revealed to marketers and ad brokers and others who could take advantage of it to your detriment. So the value, I think we sometimes lose the notion that it's not just individual value in silos financially. It's a vast array of other resources that can be shared and spread around from your vantage point. And then there's the non-academic value to you as a member of society, and then to society writ large. And those are the things I'm excited about as we see some of these newer technologies and business models arising to tap into that value. Again, on our terms as individuals, as members of communities, not just for those chosen few who have hit upon sort of the gold bot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now we have some cases, trillion-dollar companies that are made off of fractional value engagements, right? Billions, if not trillions, of fractional value engagements. Maybe someday we can also make some income, not our full income, but some income off of fractional value engagements the same way. So we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to keep that in mind and keep this moving along a little bit. But so far, we've discussed the current state of the industry and identified many of the problems. And I think where I'd like to end with, and what we've got some questions about, is how do we improve the situation? So for this last 10 minutes, let's talk about what needs to change in the underlying infrastructure of the web in order to make it better for the future. What's standing in the way? Are there solutions that we should be watching for? And ultimately, can privacy coexist with profit? So Richard, I'm going to kick it off with you. If you want to maybe talk about, I know we've spoken a lot about decentralized web, asset management, and you have so much work and experience in identifying remedies for the future. So if you want to maybe kick it off there.
Yeah, happy to. And just to sort of frame it a bit, we have political challenges, right, which is the policy world. We have economic challenges in terms of business models. We have social challenges, which is getting us all organized as users and citizens and clients and demanding change from policymakers and from businesses. And then we have the technology side. And in some ways, the technology side is the easiest. We already are seeing some really amazing examples of technologies that have been born of the decentralized web movement. Some of this is the so-called Web 3.0, which taps into blockchain and smart contracts and cryptocurrencies, NFTs. We've seen the headlines again around that. And like the original web, a lot of that is sort of the smoke, but some of that is very much the heat of actual real innovation. So excited to see where that goes. But even beyond that, what I call edge tech is just this basic premise of the technology that today is in the cloud coming to reside with me at the so-called edge of the network on my device, maybe on a personal data pod sitting in my home, which is what Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who actually created the web, is involved with his Solid project. His Solid project. There's something called Opal, which is at MIT, which is the idea of the smart algorithm that moves to me. My data stays local, maybe on a personal data pod, thanks to Tim Berners-Lee and Solid, but the algorithm does its work locally on my data, and it never, the entity behind it never actually grabs or controls the data. It always stays with me. They just take back the insights or other indicia that I give them the agreement, the authorization to get access to. There's things like secure data tokenization environments that are happening with some of these blockchain enterprises. There are companies out there that are having viable ways to port your data, which you can take your data off a platform, but not just take it from the platform, find other ways to use it. As we talked about earlier, the multiplier effect of you being in charge of figuring out what to do with the behavior data that you've created over time. And then my own startup, I'll just, a 10-second plug. The Deeper Edge is the idea of a digital fiduciary. So taking the fiduciary laws, the common law of doctors, lawyers, folks we already have enormous trust in because of their expertise and because they have access to our sensitive data. Why not apply that same premise to the web? Why not have a 21st century version of that, but instead of for your health or for your finances, it's for your data. And it's somebody that helps to manage because they're doing it as a duty of care and loyalty to you and not to anybody else. So I think those are some of the technology implementations out there that I think are going to be fueling this next generation of the web.
Awesome, man. A lot of exciting stuff you're working on. I've heard from you over the last couple of years. So, Tamra, if you could please help everyone understand. I know with our research team, you've been working to understand the policy landscape in the U.S. and abroad, and where it is, where it may be. If you could just take a couple minutes to explain to everyone kind of what's going on. What do we have going on here in the U.S.? What do you think might be coming down the pipe they should be looking for? What should they advocate for if they were asked by their representatives what they want,
Sure.
If you could take some time to explain some of that.
Yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, there is currently a patchwork of state privacy laws across this country. And we also have, the EU's GDPR. There are all of these different privacy laws that have been enacted both at the state level at the federal level here in our own country, we don't have a comprehensive federal privacy law. We have various different federal statutes that protect different subject matters. So for example, you have HIPAA, which protects your medical information. You have, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which protects some of your financial information and how it's used and who's responsible for correcting it. I think where we are going to see things coming in the future is potentially a comprehensive federal privacy law. There actually have been a few proposed that would preempt the state patchwork we currently have, maybe give the FTC some additional enforcement and rulemaking authority. And I think you'll see that this is in an effort to try to rebalance what is a currently lopsided relationship between us as the user and the companies who are using our data. I think the biggest impediment to whether this happens is, whether there can be enough agreement on enough of these key items to get enough senators to be able to vote for it. And that seems to me going to be the biggest challenge here, because I think it'll be the biggest challenge. But I could be wrong. We'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world today that this administration has to deal with. So hopefully privacy becomes top of mind to them, but also maybe it's a state-by-state thing. So lastly, to finish this off, we got about 3 minutes left. Hessie, if you could just help everyone understand there's a lot of people on here just trying to start off. They're trying to get a company off the ground. They've gotten it off the ground, then they're trying to figure out how to become more responsible. If you could talk everyone through, what can a small, medium-sized business do today to help change the landscape and kind of not avoid, but distance themselves from the reliance on the big tech, the AWS, the Google services, the whatever it may be. How can they move forward? What products are out there that a small and medium-sized business could pick up and run with today and change and improve the situation for themselves and their users?
Thanks, Joe. So lots of technologies that are out there. We do have better examples of G Suite, like Zoho. Zoho is great, and they've been able to build their platform from scratch so that people can have collaboration documents, email, etc., to use and not have to worry about that. I think some of the best practices that are out there also, you need a password manager. I for one still have a Word document with all my passwords, although it is, I have to say, password protected. So nobody will be able to find that password anywhere because it's on my person. But that's not a best practice. We have to be able to get businesses to understand what are the things that we need to do, not only technology, but process-wise, to be able to protect ourselves and our employees. So the one thing I will say, though, Joe, because apart from those practices, there are small businesses that are trying to do this already. They're trying to create tools out there that are more privacy preserving. Whereby has one that's an alternative to Zoom, right? Your people are always trying to come up with the new signal that's more privacy preserving, so that it removes, let's say, the history of your text. But there are companies like Prevo that are out there that are actually trying to certify technologies, who offer kid tech solutions so that we better protect our kids and their data. Private AI is a company that I know that's actually creating a solution to ensure that they de-identify personally identifiable information at the start, so that the balance of the information can be used to optimize user experience or for retention purposes. So there's lots of technologies like that. I would be remiss if I Pulse policy perspective, we want to give small, medium businesses an easier way to implement, manage, and scale a lot of their data protection needs. And so we take the first step of asking the owner to answer questions about their customer data, what purpose, what technologies they're sharing it with. Through this exercise, a lot of the website owners will start to understand and come to terms with what they're collecting, who they're sharing it with, and what are the potential risks to their business. It gives also customers a much different way of viewing policy other than the static stuff. So I just want to mention two more companies, because one company that's actually creating a recommendation engine like Netflix, but it's actually not using any personal information. He's just using search information that's anonymized. And he thinks that this is a way to be able to make money for businesses without needing all that excess personally identifiable data. And then one company who's very ambitious and creating his own OS and trying to compete against iPhone and Android. He's developed his own cell phone, his own customized apps that put the user full in control of their information. And the one last thing I want to say, because we talked about the future of privacy. I used to work with Ann Cavoukian, the privacy commissioner here in Canada, and she believed in this positive sum game where there's no need to have trade-offs between privacy and profit. And from all the research that I've done about the future of privacy tech, there is going to be a growth. Like even between 2010 and 2019, we've already grown almost 10 times the amount of spending on privacy technology. And this is going to continue in the future. By 2024, 60% of the data that will be used for development of AI models are going to be synthetically generated. So there will be hopefully no more need to actually use personal data to be able to do these kinds of things. So I think that's where we're headed. I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping that all these things come together from a consumer perspective, business, and government in order to make this happen.
Awesome. Well, that's our time for today. So just want to reiterate, thank you to everyone. Thank you for all being here and volunteering your time for the panel. Thank you, David, for putting this together, and Team Rebecca and everyone else. I know it's so much work to put these things together.